Hi, I'm Christy Burcham with Mettler, and I want to show you a technique today on how to create invisible applique. One of the things that we love about hand applique is that you can't really see the stitches that hold the applique fabrics in place. So you can replicate this look using a clear transfil monofilament thread. And here's the project that we're going to be doing in our video, and I'm going to break down for you step by step how to get this invisible applique look. Let's take a look at the supplies we'll be using for this project. First of all, you're going to need your pattern, and this particular pattern, you can find the link to this in the notes below the video. You're going to need a muslin fabric, a lightweight muslin that is, for each piece of applique, is at least 1/4 of an inch larger than the pattern all the way around. You'll need your applique fabrics, which also need to be larger than your pattern by at least 1/4 of an inch. You'll need a transfer marker, so some sort of temporary marker that will wash out completely. Then you'll need your background fabric. We're using a white tone-on-tone print for our background that we'll be appliquing onto, and a piece of tearaway stabilizer that will go under the background fabric to keep it stiff while we apply the applique. We'll be using the Mettler Web Bond Temporary Adhesive Spray to apply our appliques to the background fabric and hold them in place while we stitch them. And we'll be using two kinds of thread today. We'll use a 60 weight silk finish cotton thread. This is a nice lightweight cotton thread and it works really well for this technique. And we'll be using the Transfil, which is a monofilament thread, a clear monofilament thread. So we'll be using this, and this is what will actually give us the invisible part of our invisible applique. Our first step is to place the muslin over the applique pattern. You do not need to reverse the applique pattern for this technique. And when we trace this, we just want to trace it with our temporary marker, and we'll trace that line all the way around, making sure again that you leave at least 1/4 of an inch around the pattern all the way around on your applique piece. So now you're going to take your applique fabric, you're going to place the muslin on top of it with the traced side up. So when you're looking at the fabric, you want the pattern side facing you. And you'll do that with all of the applique pieces that you'll be working with. You're going to layer them together, and now we're going to take them to the sewing machine. Now that we're at the machine, we are going to stitch along the traced line through both layers of fabric. And we want to use a neutral thread or a thread that matches the applique fabric, the top fabric. We're using that 60 weight Mettler silk finish cotton thread. We want a nice fine thread, something that's not going to add bulk to this applique, because we're actually going to turn the applique along that stitched line. I like to use a clear presser foot when I do this stitch so that I can see the line very easily and trace it perfectly as I go. And if you have any points along the way, you'll need to do a pivot as you come along the edge. So we're just going to sew this right along that line using the guide on the presser foot to keep my line right under the needle. And we'll do that all the way around the entire shape. Once you've finished stitching the shape, you're going to trim about 1/4 of an inch away all the way around your applique shape. And then you're going to want to clip any corners, making sure you don't cut through your stitching. And you might need to do a little bit of clipping along the curves, because we are actually going to turn this right side out. So if you need to do any little bit of clipping to get a smooth turn, again making sure you don't cut through the stitching line. Now we are going to cut a little slice right into the muslin, making sure not to cut the applique fabric, only the muslin. And you can cut a pretty good slice. Just need a piece big enough to start turning this right side out. Once you've started turning your shape, you can use a chopstick or other turning tool to get all the points smoothed out. And you want to make sure that you turn this as much as you can. Kind of give it a little finger press, and then you'll give it a real press with the iron. You may want to sort of roll the seams as you press. We want that muslin to be completely tucked under all the way around. So we'll press that nice and flat. Okay, now we've prepped and pressed both of our applique pieces and got them nice and crisp. And what we want to do now is apply them to the background. And we'll actually be working these appliques one at a time. So we'll start with our lowest level of applique, and we're going to stitch it to the background fabric. So the first thing we're going to do is to spray the back of this applique with the Web Bond temporary adhesive spray. And we're just going to use a light spray is all we need to get that sticky enough to hold that onto our background fabric while we do our stitching. So now we've got that in place, and we're ready to take that to the machine and stitch it on. Now we're back at the machine, and we've put on a edge stitch foot, so something that can ride along the edge of our applique as we stitch to keep us along the edge of the fabric. We've set the machine up with the clear Transfil thread is what we're using in the top. We're still using the 60 weight cotton thread in the bobbin. You could use the Transfil in the bobbin as well, but the 60 weight also works really well, and it just saves me from having to change it at this point. We've also set the machine up with a stitch like a blind hem stitch, so we're looking for a stitch that has a spine that's going to go along the edge of the applique into the background fabric, and then every few stitches it's going to put a little bite into the applique fabric itself. So we've set this up with a blind hem type stitch, setting the spine along the edge and then a narrow little bite into the edge of the fabric. You'll want to do some test sewing with a scrap so you can get familiar with how your stitch is going to lay out, how the needle is going to align with your edge stitch foot, so that you can keep, again, that spine of the stitch in the background fabric and just a few occasional stitches into the applique itself. And we'll go all the way around the applique to secure it in place. Next, we'll use the same technique. We'll put the second piece of applique. We've also sprayed this down with the Web Bond temporary adhesive spray, and we're going to stitch this one down. Now, when you have these little tight curves here, sometimes you'll have a little bit of the muslin that wants to peek through, and as you stitch, you can continue to tuck that under using a stylus or your finger and roll that as you stitch it in place to keep that muslin from showing.